Hello, this is TelecomTV. I'm Martin Warwick. We're here in Phoenix in Arizona in the United States at the ETSI NFV Network Function Virtualization meeting and number 8. It follows 7 and it's before 9. And the next one, 9, will be in Prague in the Czech Republic in due course. Now, talking with Barak Perlman, who is Senior Architect at ConteXtream. Barak, welcome. Let's start by asking you about your company. What does ConteXtream do in terms of NFV?
So ConteXtream is a pioneer in the field of SDN and NFV. Actually, we've been deploying SDN and NFV prior to the establishment of NFV and all the standardization. So we have a pre-standard deployment in various carriers in the US and outside. And we've been deploying actual real-live NFV and SDN for years now. Good, okay. That set things in context. Now, we're here in Arizona at this ETSI meeting, NFV number 8, as we've said. And as we've seen during the course of this, officially the end of phase 1 and the beginning of phase 2. So let's put things in a bit more context. Phase 1 started from nothing, from the ground up, and has built an amazing head of steam and momentum in a very short time. What do you make of the success and the ending of phase 1? First of all, we're right now in the stage of finishing up stage 1, publishing all the documents and closing the various working group that's been active for the past 2 years, and transitioning to the definition of what is going to be NFV phase 2. Phase 1 has been a big success, actually. Everybody's talking about NFV, and this is something that has been very successful in the industry. So not only in this specific place in NFV8, everybody's talking about NFV. We just came from a session about liaisons, so we've been getting responses from many groups of industries that are interested in cooperating with NFV. So it's been quite an impact on the industry. So I've been to several industries and organizations before, and this is quite a change. The change is being led by the carriers. The carriers have defined that they want to see some change and they want to absorb virtualization and start using, instead of proprietary boxes, start using open servers and open software, and it's a big change. They haven't done that for, never before. And right now they're paving the way for other carriers, not just the ones here, to start using this approach.
Well, what's different about NFV and SDN from the start? We mustn't forget SDN, and they're running in parallel there, and we'll hopefully meet at some point in infinity in the future. But we mustn't forget that what's different about NFV is the fact that, as you've mentioned, there are, I believe, 37 carriers and operators involved in this initiative. And that's unusual. They're global operators. They're having a big impact. In the past, there's often been lock-in to a particular vendor by a particular vendor to a particular operator, and the operators seem to have had quite enough of that, thank you very much, and want things to change. And that's obviously having an impact on the way things are going for phase 2.
Right, so the main thing about NFV is starting to separate the software from the hardware boxes. So you used to have those large proprietary boxes, and in those boxes you had usually small controllers that ran the control software. Right now, the thing is that the big boxes will stay there just as pipes to send packets from here to there, but the control layer is spread out to new boxes. They don't have to be incorporated in the same proprietary boxes anymore. And then once you put them in a different server, you could virtualize everything, and you can put lots of software in the same server. So you can utilize your resources a lot better. And once you virtualize and a new server comes around, you can always replace the old server with a new one, and there's no impact to the service itself. And also the fact is that you're not tied to a specific vendor for this application. Once you virtualize the software, you can have any software provider you want, and if the software is indeed open and the interface is open, you can replace the software as you see fit later on. So that's a big change from the lock-in. Right now, the main vendors are usually have the carriers, with they have them. They can't change much from what they already have and deploy. If they want to change, if they want a new version or a new flavor or a new something, they always have to buy it from the same vendor. They cannot match a new service or anything to this existing box.
Exactly, because they have been locked in.
they're locked in. And so and you know, the carriers have heard about Linux and all this. So everything is around new software and virtualized software and open environment, which is, I think, a good approach, not just for carriers but others. But specifically, the carriers can make a lot of benefit from using this approach.
We'll come back to openness in a minute, if we might, Barrett. Let's talk about moving into phase 2. There are some 40 items to be discussed, ratified, prioritized here, and then to be worked on in the coming weeks and months. And of course, a lot of the emphasis over the past, towards the end of phase 1, was on what are called POCs, proof of concepts, around the globe. There are many of them. And there are also some limited commercial deployments of NFV, but they're small and very specialized at the moment. Now, as I understand it, we've been moving on from the proof of concept phase in part 2, as it were, and towards field trials. So how is that progressing, and how are you involved in that with ConteXtream?
So first, we're continuing on the same manner that we've done before. We've contributed a proof of concept. We've done a proof of concept with a few other vendors and carrier, and we provided some examples of how to use service chaining in the GLAN environment, and we think that's been important. And right now, I think there are more than 26 proof of concept already, and we're already in the works for providing another proof of concept to show to the industry that NFV can be deployed. But this is in the lab, as you said. The lab deployment are different than the field trials. Sure. I think that the main impact that the NFV should have right now is to start showing the world, showing everybody that this can be used in real life networks in some pilots or field trials, or this should be the focus of the next stage of NFV. So right now the focus is more on maybe POCs that are open, so many vendors and many open source can be part of this POC. But the way I've been trying to steer this is in the group that I'm with is starting to open up to more general proof of concept, not just proof of concept, but going out and provide field trials. I think this should be, you know, the main focus that carriers should adopt right now. They are doing small field trials, but they've not come public to this in this specific venue. They've not come up and say, okay, everybody's keeping to themselves right now, and I think this should change a little bit. And carriers should try and share their experience with those field trials and see what's next. This could be what actually NFV2 should be working, right? If there's something lacking in the field trials that they've already deployed, if there's missing parts or something didn't work well, we should learn from that and, you know, steer a little bit towards what's needed in phase 2. So that's, I think, should be, you know, the leading theme of NFV phase 2.
Well, I think it's going to be one of the main themes, because the mandate has been extended by 2 years. Right. Presumably it could always be extended again, but the original intention was that it would be finished with the end of phase 1. We've seen the way in which things have developed, so you do have that extra time. But speaking to people here over the past few days, it seems that the timetable, the hope the timetable is to have commercial deployments in 2016. So we're talking not much more than a year, 18 months before something's to be done. So these field trials have to take place pretty quickly.
Right, the field trials actually are starting to be deployed right now. The fact is not just having the field trials you know, somewhere that nobody knows about. The issue is, how do you make this public? How do we make use of the information gathered from those field trials? That would be the real challenge. You know, it's not easy for carriers to start opening up and telling the world what's been going on in those private field trials.
Well, this plays into another set of intertwined concepts which are relevant, very relevant to NFV, which of course we've already mentioned one, and we'll talk about it more in a moment. But openness, standardization, interoperability, and indeed portability are all central to the concept as well. So what do you expect to happen over phase 2 to make sure that these challenges are settled properly and to the satisfaction of all groups involved in the ETSI initiative?
So openness is not easy to tackle. You can open up and define interfaces and protocols that will be used, and that sort of usually ends up with some openness. But if you remember, there used to be standards, so for example, MPLS used to be in. At the beginning, when they deployed MPLS, even in SDH, the rings of MPLS and SDH were all from the same vendor. So even though, right now it's changing and you actually get to interoperability, but just the fact that you have a standard in place does not guarantee interoperability. So there needs to be some process in motion to assure that the things are actually interoperate. So in the protocol, you have usually options that you can set, and others can interpret the same option slightly differently. So just saying that there are protocols and interfaces being defined does not guarantee interoperability. So what NFV2 is right now saying is we should have like PlugFest or interoperability event or some testing, or one day we might even have certification and qualifications and things like this. This will actually guarantee interoperability, which is usually tough. In many fields, this was not reached, this openness. The other thing that could be very useful if people accept and start to use open source. Open source is slightly a different approach. Without saying that the interfaces need to be very accurately defined, you can start using open source software. And the open source has an approach of let's just go ahead and do it. And once you start doing it, you have to provide some means of others to develop plug-in into the same infrastructure. And this provides some, let's not call it standards, but some kind of interfaces. We can call it de facto standards. So things like Open Daylight and OpenStack provides de facto standards you can actually start deploying quite easily from day one. So you don't have to wait until you get certification in place. But people adapt to the actual de facto standards those packages provide, and then you start using them and you get some kind of interoperability by just using the open source software packages.
What about something like OPNFV, which is sort of the Linux initiative?
So we're part of OPNFV. We're also part of Open Data. We strongly believe in open source and the open source community. We think this is the right way to move forward. So we've been contributing to Open Daylight from its foundation, and we've been doing a lot of work over there. Right now we're starting to explore OPNFV and see where this takes us. OPNFV is slightly different in the sense that there is not a community of users behind it. Usually what contributes to the success of open source projects is a large community of users that use that. And in this case, we don't have a large community of users. OPNFV is meant to be used by a small group of carriers, and they will have to start checking this, playing with it, and implementing OPNFV for it to be successful. Because you have to get constant feedback to the community of code writers, open source code writers, so they can adapt and change. If there's just coding and no feedback from the actual deployments, then you don't have closure. You don't get the software to be more mature in time. So it's a two-step. First, we need to establish like a group of committers, open source contributors, and the second thing, there should be also a group of users that actually deploy that. That's the key to success of this approach.
Well, we'll see what happens by the time meeting number 9 takes place in February in the Czech Republic. We'll have to leave it there though. So Barak Poland, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you too.